When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Ali Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome to Insatiable Season 5. This season, our theme is eating triggers, namely triggers for the on-off eating cycle. And our goal is to give you clarity about these eating triggers because clarity is a process and a tool. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, you get to the root cause, right? So many times we think we're putting in all this effort, but we're not actually getting to the problem. So for example, when I was struggling with depression, I thought it was a serotonin deficiency, but really I had inflammation issues and I had to do a lot of emotional healing. So that's why I didn't really get worse, but I also didn't get better. Once I got to the root cause, oh my God, all my efforts started mattering. The second is logic doesn't change us. We all have, our logic is informed by emotional feelings and resistance. And so as we start to get clear, we can start to really understand what our feelings are in a situation, and then we're open to changing and not just learning. Lastly, clarity equals distance. So if you've ever gotten quote over something in your past and you can look at it with distance and say, hey, this is what happened. I could have done this differently. This person could have done that, but I'm really at peace with that, or I'm over it. When we can name things and label them appropriately in the present, we get a little bit of that distance, and that can start to diminish the trigger that is triggering us because we can have a little bit more choice in the moment. So today's episode, Eating Triggers, the scale, dun, da, da. The scale can be our biggest motivator when things are going well and our biggest enemy when it's going up, especially mysteriously. In today's episode, Juliet and I discuss why the scale is so triggering and offer ways to make what you weigh a less influential force in your life. And warning, this episode may blow up how you live your life. For our new listeners, Juliet is our Insatiable OG co-host for the first pretty much, I think, 2 years. And she's co-hosting this season. She's active in the fitness community since 2008. We're on a decade for her. And an expert in her field, she came to Philadelphia after working in New York City as a personal trainer at a prestigious sports club. She is the partner and nutrition director for Unite Fitness Studio Franchises, the hardest workout in Philadelphia, and a rapid growing group and personal training studio. And she's helped to craft Unite's trademark heart, muscle, mind workout methodology. And Juliet's a regular contributor on Fox and ABC News, helping educate people on the topic of fitness, health, and nutrition. And when she's not in the studio, Juliet loves to connect with nature and frequently takes trips to the Woodstock, New York area to hike and relax. Welcome back, Juliet.
Thank you. You forgot one thing about my bio.
Oh, tell me.
I like to pet my cats.
I was going to say something about your cats.
So, it's funny. Somebody took my class earlier from New York. They were visiting Philadelphia, and they said that they were stalking all the bios of the different trainers, and they chose mine because they saw I was from New York City. And she's like, oh, I love how you get to know a little bit about you. And there it said, you know, that you like to podcast and you like cats. I'm like, this is super creepy. I'm like, I'm glad you want to take my class because I like cats and stuff.
Well, I think I feel like dog people feel like there's a bond with them, cat people with them, you know.
Well, I just think it's like you're just the animal. I've never felt such an immense love for my animals. And do you have that same thing with Coffee? Do you just feel like so in love with him?
Oh my God. Yesterday I took him to the park. I take him to the park in the morning and he has his like buddies up there and he like loves to race them, like chase other dogs. And there was like this whole pack of dogs and they went flying, and this one Labrador like basically like ran over Coffee, like rolled over a couple times, and I've never seen him do that. And I was like, oh my God, is my baby okay? And then like he got up and like ran around and I was like, yeah, coffee. I was like so proud of him. I'm like, you're rough and tough. But my heart like stopped and I was like, I need help.
Yeah. I mean, one time I had to take my cat to the animal hospital in like the middle of the night, rush her there. And it is the most depressing scene ever because people do feel this love for their fur babies. It's different than children. And I mean, it has to be, it can't be the same for the human.
Well, but I think we like,
they can't, I think it has to do with the fact that they can't talk. So they can't communicate to you like what's wrong. So it just feels really vulnerable. First, I think it probably is like that with a little baby too. But like when you have a child that's old enough to like communicate and say, oh, this hurts, that hurts. But when you have like an animal that can't say anything and you can just like they're, you know, crying in pain or you can see they're in pain. I think that that's what makes it so like heart wrenching. So when you go to the animal hospital, everybody is sitting there like and experiencing that together. And we were like, everyone's crying at like 3 a.m. It was so crazy.
I said to Carlos, I was like, I forget that Coffee can't talk because I talk to him so much. Like, I'm like, he's never said a word back.
But you know how he's feeling and what he needs.
Yeah, yeah. And what I was going to say is I'm not comparing children to animals. However, I think, again, we put humans, we think we're like above nature or like separate from nature. But like when you really think about animals and babies and it's the caretaking, right? It's like that same caretaking energy that can make you feel so vulnerable. And so I think maybe it's to various degrees, but we don't want to diminish the vulnerability of when you're taking care of something and it's going through challenges. So, all right.
Yeah, and speaking of the scale, this is how we'll open the episode. I have one 20-pound cat and I have one 8-pound cat.
Oh, for a minute, I thought you said like 120. I thought you meant like 100.
Oh my gosh, no.
I was like, do you have a tiger in your...
the Guinness Book of World Records over, if that were the case. So I have one really, really overweight cat, and he barely can like walk around or do anything because of his weight. So
we're going to talk about what it triggers in us because as part of this series, you know, we are talking about how all of these different triggers are inherently neutral, right? And at the end of the day, the scale in its most basic form is just an electronic machine that spits out numbers. And yet it's what it brings up in us that feels really vulnerable and often oddly makes us eat. And we're going to get into that. But before we kick that off, I want to make a very clear statement here because this is something I was just chatting with in a client this week. Society correlates your weight with your health, and those do not correspond. But as a society, that narrative hasn't changed, and we are society. So if we can start to change our own perceptions, we can start advocating for ourselves and educating other people. But I just wanted to put that out at the beginning, you know, that like you can weigh a certain weight and still be very healthy. And you can be super thin in a small number on the scale and not be healthy. So I just wanted to put that out there so that we can, you know, move on, that we're not talking about health. We're strictly talking about what the numbers on the scale mean and when it feels like the scale is not going our way. So Juliet, I wanted to ask you, and then I'll share mine, the trajectory of the scale in your life. Like how have you used the scale and how are you using it today? And then we're going to get into some of the different levels of triggers that the scale creates.
Well, I think that I never focused on the scale until I was in 8th grade. So I was 13 years old. And you know, in the beginning of the school year, you would go to the nurse and they would have checkups. Do you remember doing that?
Oh my God, yes.
Right? You'd have to have a checkup at your school nurse, which I think is kind of bizarre because you get a better checkup at your primary care physician. But anyways, so I remember, you know, going, and it's the same school nurse from 7th grade to 8th grade. And I remember being 115 pounds. And I believe the nurse had said something like, wow, you know, since last year, you've gained, I don't know, 15 pounds or whatever it was. And I just remember feeling whatever she had said to me felt very negative and made me feel really vulnerable and just exposed. Like something, I'm not doing something right. Something is wrong. And at that time, also, my parents were going through a divorce and there was a lot of like home stuff going on. And that is when I went on my first diet. So, which was probably me reading something out of like 17 magazine, of like what to eat, what not to eat. It was like, I need to eat salads all the time. I didn't know about calories in, calories out, low carb, high carb. I was just like, I can't eat junk food anymore. I'm eating salads. But I didn't really stick with that. But
I think it's interesting though that you're like, this must be wrong. And one of the triggers is, uncertainty. What the scale triggers is like something must be wrong. And then how you even kind of, your parents are going at a divorce at the same time. And it's almost like all of these events get like mushed together, even though they're very separate, but right?
Yeah, because, controlling what you're eating and exercising can become a way of managing your anxiety and stress levels, which is what it did for me. It was like giving me a purpose and something to think about and obsess over, other than actually dealing with the real emotions, which is I should be, obsessing and freaking out over like who's getting custody of me and my brother. Like, where are we going to live? What's going to happen? So
yet at that age, you don't really have any influence, right?
Yeah. So instead I would just start going running, went to the YMCA, started like lifting weights and like, at my freshman year of high school, and just was constantly thinking that something was wrong with my body. And I was trying to fight the bulge, the inevitable bulge that I thought that was going to happen to me, especially because I do have a lot of overweight family members. My dad was extremely heavy. And ultimately, when I was 16, he had a massive heart attack and he passed away. And he was about 350 pounds. So all of his brothers, he had a bunch of half brothers, and they were all about 400 plus pounds. So it was always in my head that I had to I was like running away from becoming really overweight. So the scale was something for me that I just used as a way to like measure if I'm okay or not, what my fate's going to be.
Mm.
Then it got to a point where, because the scale made me so miserable, I avoided the scale. So I'm an avoider. That's I am. So when I'm a procrastinator, avoider, perfect example today, I have a lot of work to get done. It's the doldrums of August right now. This is how I justify it. This is my avoider justification. I'm not getting a lot of emails. My clients are out of town, even though I do have like a lot of things to ramp up and get ready for like post Labor Day. Instead of doing all of that, I just went to sleep for 2 hours. I just took a nap before we got this podcast going. And that's like one of my major avoiding techniques. I'm really good at napping.
You should take Why Am I Eating This Now? It's about emotional agility too.
Yeah. And I know that.
So you were avoiding the scale. That's what you were saying.
So it's a similar thing. So I just started avoiding the scale and never going on it. But that didn't take the obsessiveness and the focus off of my body and, how I looked in clothes or how I felt about myself. All that still remained the same, even though I was not stepping on the scale. And then the times that I would be like, okay, you have to step on the scale. It's been so long since you stepped on the scale. It would just create even more of a miserable feeling for me and a feeling of, worthlessness and like, I'm not good enough. I need to change this. And then it wasn't until I worked through a lot of my emotional issues, food issues in my early to mid 20s that the scale started to shift for me. And also, as actually when I started really focusing on like bodybuilding, I've never done a bodybuilding competition or anything, but working on strength training and like changing the shape of my body through weight training and learning about body fat percentage versus your weight and the difference that your weight is comprised of body fat, muscle, tissue, water. It's not, your weight isn't just one number. Like, what does the number actually mean? And that helped me shift things a little bit, just understanding the science behind things, because when I was focusing on really strength training, taking care of myself, my body fat number ended up going to a really, really what you would call like healthy, lean spot on if you look at like a chart, of what a good body fat percentage is. However, that can still be the same thing in that now it's looking at that number and not a weight number, right? But it did help just take it off of the, just the scale number for me. And, I think then over time, things have just shifted more and more that I love myself, accept myself. I step on the scale, or I would say it's still a little more challenging with the body fat because, again, I kind of use that number instead of the weight number to feel like I'm in a good place or not. But now it's like, how do I feel about my life, how it's going, the relationships around me. It's not just about how I look or what the number says about me. It's very much beyond that. And I've been able to weigh myself pretty regularly. And I'm not one to weigh myself like every day. I don't own a scale, but at work, occasionally I'll go on it and it might be a little up, it might be a little down. And it's just a number. It's just data. Now I do have to say that I'm comfortable enough with myself that if it's, the scale is really up, again, it's just data. It's something for me to be aware of and think to myself, well, I do need to maybe start taking a little better care of myself. Maybe I've been a little too loosey-goosey with like going out and not, eating clean. But it doesn't make me want to scream, cry, tear my hair out, hide under the covers, and not leave the house that day like it used to.
Yeah. Well, and you said so many interesting things. I love how, and again, if people don't need to use a scale, they don't need to use a scale. But the avoiding, sometimes we think like, oh, the scale, like we're over that, but it's just an avoiding technique. And then we look to other metrics. And I think that's a really great point that you brought up. And also just kind of how it has evolved over time, right? I think a lot of times we were like, I'm never weighing myself again, but like that doesn't solve the problem of why we're basing our worth, to your point, on the inadequacy on certain metrics. So I'm glad that you share that. As I was thinking about this episode, I was thinking about, for me, like, I think when the scale really became something meaningful was when I went to Weight Watchers at like 11 years old. Like, I remember struggling with my weight, but I don't remember like monitoring myself so closely. Like, I was just kind of like trying not to eat and generally trying to like sports. But then when I went to Weight Watchers, it was like, you would get a star if you lost weight, right? Like every week. And it like turned it into this, I guess, competition or whatnot. And I was like, oh my God, I think Weight Watchers was part of what gave me my issues, I mean, clearly like they were going to accelerate anyways based on the ended up happening in my life. But I think Weight Watchers itself, like having to go in there and like trying to game the system by not wearing shoes and like, wearing as little clothes as possible so that they didn't count, and like going to your meeting in the morning and like, so you didn't have food in you. And then in front of everyone too, not that they saw your number, but they would give you a little booklet and like write down. So every week you were monitoring. So I remember that. And then I remember when I was 14, like, I don't remember. And also we kind of joke, like my sister and I and Carlos, like that my sister and I had different childhoods because she's like a lawyer and remembers like every detail. And I'm just like, is that what was happening? Like, I just remember a general sense of things. So this is what my memory tells me now. But I remember after chemotherapy and like, obviously I was like vomiting and throwing up and stuff. But I remember this, I had lost like I was 119 pounds, which was like the thinnest I ever was as like a teenager. And before chemo, I had been like 135 pounds, which for like a 13-year-old was pretty, I remember feeling heavy, whether I was or not, I don't know. But I remember seeing the scale at the doctor's office and I was like, oh my God, and was like excited about it, even though like I obviously didn't like the circumstances that it had happened. But I was like, oh my God, I'm 119 pounds. And of course, when I got through that and then I like started to work out a lot, I got so much attention, being like thinner and all that stuff. And a lot of people, because I'd gone through chemotherapy in 8th grade, and we like my high school was so big that like there were 3 different middle schools, and then you all filtered into like 9th and 10th grade was one school, and then 11th and 12th was another school. So like a lot of people never even knew I had cancer, right? Because we went into the next school year and I didn't lose my hair completely. So people were just like, oh, you look good or whatever. And I could fit into all the clothes my friends fit into. And then I remember just really struggling with it once I got to college and started emotionally eating and like really like, oh my God, if I was like, I remember trying so hard on diets and like if the scale wouldn't budge at the end of the week, I was like, oh, and I would eat. And that was kind of like that uncertainty. Like, I'm doing everything right. Why is this not working? But then through like healing first my health and kind of losing weight as a side effect of that, I was like, oh, the scale actually, it's a demotivator for me. Like, it's not helping me in focusing on these health metrics. And that was like a really big turning point. And then another big turning point was actually when I was working with Bob, our mutual therapist, and he's, I think, episode 24 of Insatiable, Fat is Not a Feeling. But
I miss Bob.
I know. He's not even in practice anymore.
No, he's retired, living on a lake now.
I know. He emails me sometimes. And I'm like, he's amazing. But I remember like really not caring about my weight. Like it needs to be a certain number. So while I was working with him, I remember going to see Dr. Raquel for my physical, and she's like, well, you've gained 10 pounds. And it was the year that I was working with him. And I was like, I remember being like, wow, I'm really doing some deep healing because I didn't even care. Like the old me would have been like panic, like, why did I gain 10 pounds, whatever. And I knew that the work that I was doing with Bob was so important that, and I still don't have quite language for it, but basically because of the healing I did with him of like going back and really like emotionally healing my cancer experience. And it was one piece of it. There's many pieces. It helped me be with uncertainty in a way that I hadn't been able to be before. And that's when I realized that the scale was just like the lowest level of safety of like, oh, this is how I know if I'm okay or not. And when I didn't need that anymore, because I could handle uncertainty, I was just like, Dr. Raquel was like, well, you gained 10 pounds since last year. And I was like, well, I guess I must have lost it for my wedding because I had lost weight. I don't know how much because I didn't weigh myself. But it was
wasn't on purpose when you lost weight for your wedding. That just happened.
Yeah. I mean, I was consistent with exercise 5 days a week, which was like a big deal for me.
But was that your goal around your wedding to lose weight?
No.
I didn't think so. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to enjoy myself. And like, I actually had hypothyroid and I had a thyroid cancer scare. So it was just more about like really slowing down. But I was still, I think, in that avoiding piece of the scale because I was like, the scale would still kind of, it wouldn't set me off like it used to, but it definitely like would make me frustrated. And I was like, I don't need that right now.
It's funny to think though, just around like, events like a wedding, for example. I had always imagined like years ago that when the time came for me to get married, I would kick it into high gear and I would be so motivated to like eat the cleanest I've ever eaten and exercise. And I would have like the best body I've ever had in my life because those pictures last forever. And this is your moment, If there was ever a time that I would be motivated to be the thinnest, it would be then. And I remember, months would go by, no motivation, more months would go by, still didn't have the motivation. And then I got married and I was like, because I'm not in that place anymore.
Well, you also realize it's like how you feel that day. And I feel like the fact, like it's just this patriarchal myth that this is your only moment. Like, fuck that. Like, I want more moments than my wedding. Like, this is not my peak. But at the time I was still kind of avoiding it. And then it just like, it has just become kind of something neutral. In fact, I think you even remember, like to your point about like, sometimes you'll use it to get to see like, oh, maybe I've been too loosey-goosey. Like I had to go to a doctor's appointment in February and like I noticed that I had gone up 5 pounds. And I think it was like since I moved to Pittsburgh, I don't really remember the whole date, but I texted you and I was like, how much cardio do I need to do? Because I hadn't really been working out consistently, but it was more like, it wasn't like there's a deadline for this. It was just like, okay, Ali, you've gained 5 pounds in the past 3 years and it's probably from not walking as much. And like, you just need to work out. And like, I mean, I've been doing it too because it's the summer and I'm like, I'll do 3 in the fall when it's not as hot and stuff. But like, I've been working out and I can feel like the little kind of like bubble I felt on my waist decrease. And for me, it was just more like, I want to nip this in the bud turning 40 because they say like the average person gains like a pound or 2 a year. And then it's like, you end up like 20 pounds heavier after a decade. And like,
it's a big hormonal shift for people. And that, the thing is, I've been having a lot of older clients who have been coming to me wanting I need to get rid of this tire around my waist. This is a big thing for women who are like post-menopause.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And there is a reality to this that I tell them, which is that tire may never go away. Like the flat stomach that you had in your 20s, 30s, even up into your 40s, it might not completely disappear in your 50s, going into your 60s, going into your 70s. Your stomach is going to shift and change. And we have to focus on different metrics, which is like as you're going into, getting older, and Ali and I are doing an episode on aging. So, but you do have to have a level of acceptance while trying to do your best. But it can't be so focused on, again, like the number on the scale or your body fat number decreasing. It is about just doing your best to take care of yourself. But what happens, Ali, when it doesn't work? For example, that 5 pounds that you gained and you're starting to work out and exercise and do all the things. What if those 5 pounds, they just don't come off? Then what?
Yeah. So, well, and that's what I want us to like get into so that we can really get clear on what we are projecting onto the scale. Because this is, again, this episode may blow up your life. So, but when we think of the triggers, again, that cause us to eat, they are what's at the tail end of this. So, does the scale make me feel tired? Like, oh, I'm exhausted from this battle. Oh my God, I can't do it anymore. I'm just going to spiral, right? Anxious. Why is this happening? Why can't I get the weight off? Why is the weight going up? Why won't it go down? Why won't my body change? Feeling inadequate. You mentioned that, Juliet. I used to feel like that with the scale, right? Like, why am I not good enough? Why do I feel invisible? Why will I never meet someone? Why will I never get the job, right? Like, it's amazing how like we step on the scale and all of a sudden it spirals us into these feelings. And then loneliness, like I'm the only one struggling with this. Why do I let this stupid machine guide my life, right? And what I have realized through my own journey and that with clients is that these certain numbers that we arbitrarily pick, and I want us to get into like the physical, emotional, and soul level of this craving for a specific number. But the health world really reinforces this, the medical system. But what happens is we think certain weight numbers are going to be finish lines, right? So, and we'll talk about that on like an emotional and soul level. But we think the scale, if these numbers, we reach a certain number, that we're actually not going to feel tired, anxious, inadequate, or lonely ever again. That is what we believe. And that's why that number, and we might not be able to see it at first, and that's why we have to be willing to explore and learn our own self-awareness of what we think is going to happen. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's been really revelatory for my clients and seeing that number. It's kind of like, you know, when you think like, oh my God, if I get married, right, then everything's going to fall into place. Or if I get my dream job, and you realize like, okay, that's actually when the real work begins. Right?
I just have to say something that before I lose my train of thought, that I just thought of a situation that happened last weekend. I was with two of my friends, one of which is, she has like a very small frame and a small figure. And then another one of my friends who is a more voluptuous, larger woman. And we were all out shopping and having a good time, and they had just met, so they don't really know each other. And my friend who has the smaller figure said to me, I just love how she, this other girl, you know, is so confident in herself, and she really carries her weight well. And the way she said it was saying like, as if she was in like disbelief that somebody like her who was heavier could be living such a amazing life and could have confidence and could be enjoying herself and could be doing all the things that like a skinny person would do. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, because I feel like that is a lot of how people perceive like people's looks, you know?
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of us, if we feel like we're carrying extra weight around because of what the scale says, what we're really afraid of is being misunderstood, right? Is like, that's that uncertainty. Like, you don't understand that I'm healthy. You don't understand that I try.
Yeah.
And that's part of, I mean, that's the emotional hunger. We'll just jump right there, because that is the emotional hunger that we have, that the aesthetic will make us feel emotionally safe, that we belong, that we literally and metaphorically fit in, right? And it's like, this is something I know, it's not about my weight for me, but it's like, I never want to be misunderstood, right? It's like the worst feeling in the world. And I think that's why we need to really start from a physical perspective, saying there's different health metrics that matter, right? Even the BMI. I was researching the BMI for this episode. Did you know it's like a 200-year-old hack? Like it's like nuts. It's something this like scientists made up. There's no correlation, because similar to what you were saying about the scale, doesn't measure fat, like your waist circumference, which can be important.
Which I also think is a little bullshit.
Oh, good.
Well, just because, I mean, I think both are, and partially because of my own personal experience with it. My BMI is high, according to that, and my waist circumference is high, according to that.
Well, and what they were saying with the BMI is it doesn't account for how heavy your bones are, like how much fat you have versus muscle. But society believes this. And a lot of people in the health field, dietitians, trainers, they really do think that thin people are healthier. And so that's the physical. Like,
wait, so I had an x-ray a couple years ago. My husband thought this is the funniest thing. So we're getting the x-ray results back and the doctor comes in and I go, I really want to know this for a long time, but like, do I have big bones? Like, I want to know, like, are my bones bigger than most women? You know, because like my weight is always higher than, you know, what the BMI says or whatever. So I was like, you know, am I big boned? And the doctor was like, I was insane. He's like, your bones are perfectly normal. They're not big at all. They're just a normal average bones. Mackie was like, I cannot believe you just asked that.
Well, the doctor doesn't know how to measure the weight of bones, so he's
who knows? I know, but it was just funny because I was like, I said something I've always wanted to know. Am I big boned?
Yeah. But I want to, you know, I did a solo episode. It was called Your Green Juice Doesn't Make You Worthy, episode 75. But it was about how this meritocracy myth in America, and I want to just define that. And this is why I believe that this is a big reason that we think that weight matters so much in our health. So the meritocracy belief is fundamental to American culture. It believes that if you put in effort, you will be rewarded, and that we don't judge people based on color, creed, gender, religion, whatever, that it's a merit. And as a result, we believe everything is individual based. Right? It's like up to you. If you're succeeding, you're successful. If you're failing, it's your fault. And that's kind of the American dream, what the American dream is built on. But America doesn't ever account for the environment that you grow up in or where you start, or even the environmental issues with weight, like how much light you're getting every day. Or, I mean, I first gained weight because I was exposed to pesticides because it inflamed me. I didn't know that at the time. I was just like, why am I gaining weight? And so, like, I want people to really understand that this myth puts in this idea that if you're thin, you've earned it, that you're disciplined, you're hardworking, that's success, you're in control, right? Mm-hmm. Throw in some puritanical influence, right? The Puritans were like, work, 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 right? And then the underlying meaning is that you're heavier, you're out of control, you're undisciplined, and you're lazy. And America, with its puritanical corset, doesn't like that. And I'm just, again, here to say, fuck that. Like,
well, yeah, and that was the perfect example of what I was giving with my friend. It's like, wait, she's successful. She's sure of herself. She's,
yes,
exactly. She makes a good living. We were shopping. She was buying all like clothes and like, you know, into it and like, you know, and feeling confident with herself. It was like, my one friend was like, wow, that is incredible. Like, you know, not something that you see. You know, because most women, I don't want to make a blanket statement and say most women, but women who are heavier, it's like they don't deserve to have those same privileges or feelings that, you know, thin women have, which is fucking bullshit.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's like, why shouldn't? I mean, I think I'm overweight on the BMI. I don't even know because I haven't weighed myself and I haven't looked at the BMI, but it's like, it's just so bizarre. But again, if you believe in that meritocracy myth, and most people don't see that that's kind of what they're filtering life through. And then here's the thing is what we think being thin is going to give us a couple of things. First of all, ease. So like whether we can get the tire around our stomach as we enter perimenopause or we just can't lose weight or not, why it feels so important to reach that number is we think a certain number is going to give us ease. Okay. So if you think about it, like, and there was this great article on Medium. I posted it on my Instagram account. It started called The Effortless White Woman. And they use Gwyneth Paltrow and Ivanka Trump as examples. And this woman just wrote this great thing. She's like, I realized I thought when I lost weight, like I was going to be on this deck with the breeze blowing and drinking a green smoothie. How I was going to afford that deck, I don't know. How I was going to have time as I'm racing for my job, I don't know. And what is really sold as is weight loss is really ease. And what really causes ease.
Doors opening for you.
Yes.
More people loving you, more opportunities coming your way. You have this level of confidence and feeling like reassured about the world.
Yes. But what's really causing Gwyneth Paltrow and Ivanka Trump, like it reminds me of this New York Times piece. It was either a New York Times piece or this piece. They talked about how Gwyneth Paltrow doesn't raise her children. She enjoys them. And it was just like how everything that those of us who really, right? Like it's not about that they're probably thin in part because they're wealthy, because they have staffs and they can afford chefs. And, you know, I mean, it was just really interesting. And it's just not only their looks. And of course that helps. But if you're if you're wealthy, you can invest the money to be pretty, right? Like Carlos has this whole thing how even teeth are such a class issue, like straight teeth, right? It's like, could you afford braces? All these things that we associate with beauty, because we care about meritocracy in this culture, we also kind of confuse the two. But here's the challenging thing is a lot of people who struggle with food and their weight have unresolved trauma, right? And so those of us who have unresolved trauma that we don't know, we don't trust ease. And so we never create it in our life, but we want it. And so we think that losing weight is going to give us all that ease. Is that clear? Like that projection that we have?
100%. I think that's why for me, for so many years, I continued to overeat and binge eat, even when I had thought that I had resolved a lot of, the external things in my life. Like I'm not in that bad relationship anymore. I'm not living in that environment anymore. I'm creating more like a better routine for myself. And yet I still held on to overeating at night and couldn't let it go until I dealt with some of the really deeper issues, like my fear of safety. Like I had always had this like fear of like, I'm not safe, and that was from having a really traumatic childhood. And until I really tackled that and went deep enough to then relax and feel like the world isn't as scary, things are safer, then some of those things finally started to fall by the wayside and I didn't need to overeat all the time.
Exactly. And so I want for listeners, think about, are you projecting ease onto a certain number on the scale? And then do you love ease, but then struggle with it? Like I'm someone who loves that I'm a hard worker, right? It's like, and part of that is I am a hard worker, but part of it's also, I don't trust ease that much, right? Like that scares me. Even with all the healing I've done, I still, sometimes am challenged with it. And if you're someone who says it's just going to be easier to be the real me, if I lose weight, you may not have unresolved trauma or have to go as deep as Juliet did, but there's some sort of judgments around ease. So you want it, but then like to have it, it could be really scary. And so if we think weight loss is going to eliminate those tail triggers, oh my God, I won't be tired because, right? Oh my God, I'm going to have all the energy in the world to make green smoothies and sit and journal while the breeze ruffles my hair, right? Or, a lot of my clients say, oh, you won't be so tired from being on all the time, or you won't be so doubtful and have to feel like you'll be on or inadequate or lonely. And so the good news is that you don't have to lose weight or reach any number on the scale to have that. What really makes life easier, and I would say that even if you have wealth, that definitely doesn't mean life will be easy. Because to your point, like you had eliminated a lot of the external things, but it's still an inside job, right? But what really makes things easier is resilience. And all of us can cultivate that. And resilience is just like, hey, I'm going to try these things. I'm going to go a little bit outside my comfort zone and then recover, right? Resiliency is about recovery and stretching yourself. And that's the cool thing. And that's why I know in my work, especially with Why Am I Eating This Now, people start to slowly not care about the scale genuinely and feel more neutral about it because they're getting the resilience that they thought was dependent on what they weighed, or the ease that they thought was dependent on what they weighed, but really is about cultivating inner resilience.
I was just talking about this earlier with someone in relation to food and how I am as an eater now versus how I used to be. And years ago, one could have looked at what I ate and said, oh my gosh, she eats so well, so clean. Everything, was sprouts and salad choices and, just really what you would think is like healthy eating, right? And, now my dinner last night was bread and cheese. And I was saying that like, I am so much happier in my life now than I was then when I was eating, quote unquote, perfect or, really clean. I eat with ease. I don't think about it being like good, bad, is a neutral thing for me. And I have all the knowledge and tools to know, how to eat healthy. And by no means am I, disrespecting my body on the regular, because I know that eventually that would not make me feel good. But I have so much other stuff, like the emotional resilience I have is so strong that the food is almost like it doesn't even, I can eat things and it doesn't even affect me anymore.
Yeah, because you trust yourself too, right? Like you're like, this isn't a regular thing. And often because we don't have resilience, the minute that like we go quote off, right, it triggers uncertainty, and we don't have any resilience to how do I manage this uncertain feeling, and we spiral downwards. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I don't eat perfectly either. I mean, in fact, we bought
People
this.
think you do though, don't they? They always, I mean, at least being in our position, I'm sure people say to you, like, you must eat so well all the time, you know?
And I'm like, no, I mean, I do most of the time, but I don't even like, it's just not a thing anymore. But again, I'm also not kind of competing with the scale of like, am I winning or losing? Or so, all right. And then we're going to get to the last one. And this is the one that is probably like the most like will blow up your life. But we're going to take a short pause for our sponsor of this episode. This insatiable episode is sponsored by my client described life-changing program, Why Am I Eating This Now? If you are tired of the on-off cycle, want food to stop being worth it in the moment, but not afterwards, and you want to stop self-sabotaging with food, this live program is for you. Early bird registration begins on September 10th. So visit alishapiro.com/food freedom 2018 to sign up to be notified when registration opens for this year's live session. Want to know a little bit more? Stay tuned to the end of this episode. Okay, Juliet. So now that we're back, I'm going to talk about the soul level hunger that we have with being a certain number. And the question for that is like, is my life meaningful? And let me explain a little bit about what I mean about why a number on a scale represents is my life meaningful. And this really came up in our last Truce with Food round. And, you know, I've said it on this podcast, but I shared this in Truce with Food that like, I joke that people who don't have religion find nutrition, right? It's a different promised land or being saved. We assume that clean eating is going to, you know, prevent us from disease, or that weight loss will give us this freedom to be us and to choose. And what's happening is when we believe we're going to get ease and we're going to get all the good things in life, culture is giving us a plan of how to orient our days, right? Like if everything hinges on what you look like and what the scale says, then weight loss is what gives your life meaning, right? Or being obsessed with health and eating so clean. That means if you're counting your macros or getting to the gym, you feel productive, right? And so if weight loss is our goal, or a specific number on the scale, or a certain body fat is our goal, then we know what our to-dos are, right? We know we need to weigh our food. We need to read about nutrition. We need to work out. All of those start to feel really meaningful. And in America, which is a land of extreme, it likes us to believe that we have one dramatic purpose, right? And so we build that up to be this big, big thing. And so we put off the very things that would give us meaning by using weight loss as an avoidance technique.
And what you mean by this one dramatic purpose is like, you know, finding your gift to the world.
Yes.
What is your gift? What are you going to, you know, offer the world? You must use your gifts.
Yeah.
but it's like a fairy tale, you know, like you're holding back. You must find the gift within you.
Yeah. But I remember when I was struggling with the scale and like would go to weigh in every week, it was like, oh, all of that stuff felt like it counted if the scale was.
What a great way to distract you from actually ever even finding out what your gift is.
Yes. And that's what my client was like, well, how do you figure out like this orientation of meaning? And I'm like, it's really hard. It takes a lot of work to figure out who you want to be when you grow up. And you also evolve and change, right? Like you and I are at this place with our businesses where we've really mastered skills and tools. And now we're having to learn how to be business people, right? It's like a different skill set. It's like you never arrive. And when you're figuring out what matters to you, you're going to be tired. You're going to be anxious. You're going to feel inadequate at times, and you're going to feel lonely because opting out of normal is not where everyone is hanging out, right? Because ultimately, if you're opting out of the scale and these triggers, you're not going to necessarily have a conventional life.
Yeah, and I'm sure you felt this way, with people that you used to surround yourself with who were maybe in the same place as you, misery loves company kind of thing. But like when I was all about, the scale or, my body, I had other girlfriends that were like in a similar place as me. So it'd be something that we would discuss and talk about. And now being around that kind of energy feels so counterproductive, and I just can't be around it because I can't relate to it anymore.
Yeah, my closest friends in college, it was all about what we were weighing and losing weight. And nowadays, like, I never talk about that with people. It's just like not what I
think, isn't that interesting too, like being a health coach, and doing what you do for a living? I know that one of the things you say, Ali, which I love, is you tell people off the bat, like, I cannot guarantee weight loss for you.
Yeah.
So if you are expecting that coming to see me, if that's something that you're putting, a measure on, or like that's how you're going to know that I was a successful coach for you, then we're not the right fit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Then you make sure that you're like, getting the right person for you too, because, I have definitely had clients who, have gotten angry with me that, I gained a pound. It's your fault. What you put me on your program, and that's never a conversation that you want to have.
Yeah, for sure. But what's happening is a lot of, again, they're being triggered, right? It's not you. It's not the lack of weight loss. It's like, what is that bringing up in me? Am I tired of this? Am I uncertain of why this is happening? Do I feel inadequate? Do I feel lonely about this? And I think, again, we can be so fulfilled. And if we start to look for meaning outside of just our health routine, it doesn't mean that you don't have to prioritize it. It just doesn't have to be front and center. And I just want to explain to everyone, because again, I think this is so glossed over because wellness kind of overlaps personal development, and a lot of multi-level marketing, like essential oils, supplements, shakes. These people who sell this, they're like, I found my passion, my purpose in the world. And they keep reinforcing that there's one purpose in life. And really, a passion worth devoting your life to is something that grows over time. And like Truths with Food on the surface is totally about getting people healthy. But what I really care about is taking people through this adult learning process that frees them and getting people out of what's called the socialized mind and getting people to think for themselves and think originally, and for clients to take leadership in their lives and go out and change the structures that are in our culture. That took me like 8 years to really figure out what I was doing. And so I think, again, it's part of that ease of like, once I lose weight, it's just all going to be easier, or like, I'll feel like I belong, right? But on our soul level, it takes work to figure out your unique purpose. I mean, and we can all do this too in various configurations. Juliet and I, obviously, we're experiencing that through our career, but you don't only have to do that through your career, right? Like, I'm always growing in my relationship with Carlos. I'm growing in my relationship with my friends and how I want to be as a social justice advocate.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong way to be using your gift or, having a purpose. You can experiment with things all the time and just see what feels good to you. I mean, there's no real definition of this. It's, what do you feel good doing in your life and what fulfills you? And no one can give you those answers. And it's not about one day waking up and you have this big aha moment, the light bulb goes off and okay, this is what I was put on this earth to do. Things like that, unfortunately, don't happen to most of us. They happen to some people, but not to most people. And I'd say it's just about giving different things a try and just seeing what makes you feel good.
Yeah. And what makes you feel deeply rewarded? I mean, I think, we talked a little bit about this with our episode with Kathleen Shannon, the difference between soul and spirit, but your soul expression is like how unique you are. It really is about your gifts, but it's an amalgam of gifts, and it's a combination of things that only you can express. And you can figure that out by really exploring your emotions and your body, because the soul sits in the body. So if you're like, this is bizarre, like I feel really good doing this, or I just, I remember one of my clients like, well, I just love walking my dogs and like walking other people's dogs. And I'm like, then do that. Like, that is one of your purposes.
And don't feel bad about it, because it's not some big thing that, that people would look at you and be like, oh my gosh, she's doing something so, incredible for humanity.
Exactly. A lot of my clients, they really discover a passion for being a leader in their workplace. I mean, they're kind of I guess you would say, entrepreneurs in their companies, not like officially, but like they really love developing people or developing themselves as leaders. And it's like, why is this so fun? And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, that if that feels meaningful, let's start focusing on that. And I think that is so important I really want people to take away, like, don't dismiss this because the soul is so esoteric or whatever, but like so much of our lives will feel meaningful independent of the scale when we really lock into that.
I want to say that I have a friend right now, and he is finishing up his residency and he's becoming a doctor, and something that, he had thought that he wanted to do, since high school, and was really encouraged to do so, because I think that there's a lot of pressure put on, these prestigious professions, right? If you say, I want to be a lawyer or I want to be a doctor at a young age, then it's really encouraged, right? And so here he is now finishing up his residency, and he is questioning his passion and calling. And we were having a conversation. He said, I really need to do something creative, and I feel like interior design is my calling. And it's like, what do I do? I'm so far down the rabbit hole. And, we were just having a conversation about, you don't have to have a crisis about it. Doesn't have to be, a big, like, I'm quitting my, my residency and like $200,000 in debt for nothing, because that's a big deal to like step down from that when you're this far. He's already a doctor,
Wow.
So we were just talking about ways that he can be feeling fulfilled in that, being creative and having an outlet. And one of them is his apartment is freaking amazing. Like, he designed his apartment. It's so nice. And I said, you could come over, and do you have any interest in looking at my apartment and like helping me pick things out? Because we just moved. And he was like so excited about that. I'm like, well, you can help friends. I also brought up to him, and he thought this was a good idea, was working on designing like hospital rooms to be to have more of an ambiance and be less scary and less sterile feeling. Because I know for me that the environment of a hospital room, it's not a warm and fuzzy environment, right?
Well, and research shows, like, even if people look at nature on a picture in a hospital room, they heal faster than people who look at a brick wall. Like,
exactly. Because I was like, you could use your design skills for something like that. And I was like, oh my God, I'm having so many ideas right now.
I'm so glad you brought that up, though, because we are really an economy and a world in transition right now, right? Like, we really are. And, I even think about him as like, he has this creativity. And when you looked at the Greeks, like, poetry and medicine were together, right? They always were describing the body in metaphor, and like illness is a metaphor, right? And then the more that we've become separate, and like Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am, and Newton and his physics law, and like, we just divorce the two. And so then people think they're either science or creative, or if they're only creative, they have no analytical ability, when really we all have both. I was even reading how left and right brain, that's a scam too. That was like designed to sell books. And actually your brain hemispheres are always talking to each other. But I think what is such a great example, like kind of the conclusion of what you're sharing, is like, we are such an economy in transition. And even one of my good friends, Jack, actually, who helped me reposition my own business, she's starting to do a lot of executive work with people who have gone to like really prestigious, MBA schools. And I was like, this is so exciting that they're bringing in your gifts, which is all about emotional intelligence and all about bold leadership. And I'm like, if it's happening at like the Harvards and the Penns, and like people really understanding how important emotions and personal development is in the business world and like the cutthroat corporate world, like, just keep following those inklings. Because like, even again, Truths with Food is totally like, I just reunited different disciplines that should have never been separate, like body, mind, unite. You guys are reuniting workouts, like the way we move, that should have never been separate. And so I think if you really want to have meaning, especially in a career, or even how you work in your communities or in the organizations that you volunteer for, or how you raise your kids, it's not going to look like what came before, because it's just, everything's broken.
Yeah, everything's segregated and things need to be a little bit more cohesive and everything works in tandem, right?
Exactly. So, yeah, any closing thoughts as we close out, how to start to pay attention to whether the scale's making you feel tired or uncertain or inadequate or lonely? It's not the scale itself, it's what you think those numbers mean or what you think it not budging or going up means. And how can you better manage those feelings? Anything in closing, Juliet?
I would say for our listeners, I have a feeling that some of our listeners might be thinking to themselves, okay, I am someone that has weighed myself every day as a measure for 20 years. I'm just throwing a number out there. So what advice would you give to that person to start to make that shift? Should they stop weighing themselves daily? Should they continue but think about things differently? What exercise would you try to give that person to support them with changing their relationship to the scale?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on what the trigger brings up, right? So if you're feeling tired, and again, also look at your stress response. Juliet mentioned she's an avoider. You can take my quiz at alishapiro.com because that will help you see how you're framing your choices. But if you're tired, what metrics actually help you? Is it going to the bathroom every day, like having a poop every day, right? Or like your cravings going down, or the fact that you moved? Start thinking about the metrics that will actually make you feel better daily if you're tired. If you're feeling uncertain, I think finding a new approach altogether, because uncertainty is a big one. It's a big trigger. And I think finding an approach that will help you start to develop belonging, independent, because I think you kind of have to work on the emotional level before you can get to the soul level, because you need chutzpah to go after the soul level. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Although they're all working on the same thing because you're helping to discover yourself. So, but the uncertainty is find an approach that really focuses on nurturing you and helping you figure out what works for your body. Because I think people think the scale motivates them, but it doesn't. I mean, I would say that's around emotional health. How can I start to feel okay with uncertainty and trusting myself? If you're feeling inadequate, I think, and Juliet, chime in here because it's not a quick fix, right? And some people, all of my clients, they all handle this a different way. Some of them, tactically will say, okay, I'm going to cut down to once a week. And that's a different delta for them. Maybe you can go every 3 days. Maybe that's clearer rather than looking.
Yeah, I always say to people, I don't think it's necessary from even a data standpoint to do it more than once a week. I just don't think you're getting anything out of that. I mean, just scientifically, that number is fluctuating because of so many things, how much water you drink, how much poop you pooped, how much, salt you ate. It's a scale moved 1 centimeter on the floor. It's not, so it's just not, I think it is overkill and unnecessary to do it like more than once a week. If you are someone that really does still feel like it's, you need to have it as a comfort point.
Yeah. And I would also say extend your timelines for however long you think weight loss is going to take you, because we do things weekly, but like that's just not how weight loss works either.
Yeah. And that also is sort of this random metric that was given to us, this whole calorie in, calorie out scenario, right, Ali? It's like, well, 3,500 calories equals 1 pound. And so if you create a 500 calorie deficit over a 7-day period, then everyone should lose a pound. Well, I'll tell you right now that, from working with clients, for 8 years doing nutrition coaching, that doesn't work. It's not an exact science because there's so much more to the human body and the soul level of whether or not somebody's holding on to weight, or there's just so many different factors than just this simple, plain, 3,500 calorie deficit equals 1 pound lost.
I know. Oh, we are such a barren culture. It's like that's like what, like no imagination, so linear. Like, oh my God.
Yes. Anyways, not to confuse everybody at the end of the episode, but feel free. I think that this episode might get a lot of questions, comments.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear from our listeners. If you guys have any questions or comments about this episode, this conversation, I think, is just so important for so many people.
Yeah. Find us on Instagram. I find that's where I have like great conversations.
Yeah.
And if you want to work on the tail triggers that the scale brings up, consider my life-changing program, Why Am I Eating This Now? And it's client described life-changing as not an exaggeration. It's true. Session after session, clients tell me this program changed their life. Or in the case of Shelley, who said, I wish I could bottle this feeling up and give it to everyone. If you're tired of the on-off cycle, want food to stop being worth in the moment, but not afterwards, and you want to stop self-sabotaging with food, especially after you don't like what the scale says, this program is for you. You will learn a clear and exact process with tools for getting to the root cause of why your emotions overpower you and you eat. You'll also learn with and from a dynamic community that likes to connect over the type of conversations we have on Insatiable. We simplify food, not give you more rules to rebel against. As one Why Am I Eating This Now client says, there is no white knuckling with this process. Early bird registration begins on September 10th. Early birds will receive a discount, early access to the classroom, and a freebie you won't want to miss. So be sure to visit alishapiro.com/Food Freedom 2018 to be notified when registration opens for this year's live session. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.